Have you ever stopped to think about why you do the things you do? I mean, really think about it. We're surrounded by these invisible currents, these unseen forces that guide our decisions every single day. We're talking about social influence, and it shapes everything from what you buy to how you act in a crowd.
I mean, think about it for a second. We've all been there, right? That feeling of just going with the flow, even if your gut is telling you something different. That moment is the perfect window into the world of social influence. Understanding that feeling is the key to understanding ourselves a little better.
So here's the game plan for today. We're going to start with those subtle, unspoken pressures to fit in. Then we'll get into the psychology of what happens when someone directly asks you for something. From there, things get a little more intense when we look at what happens when a request turns into a command. And finally, we'll tackle the big one. Where is the line between influence and manipulation?
Okay, so first up, what exactly is this unseen force we're talking about? Well, you can think of it as the invisible social glue that holds our societies together, for better and sometimes for worse.
At its heart, social influence is really all about change. It's the way the presence of other people, whether they're physically there or just in our heads, can completely alter our behavior. It's the reason we automatically whisper in a library or stand up and cheer at a game. So let's look at the first and maybe most common way this plays out.
Let's start with conformity. This is probably the one you experience most often. It's that quiet internal pressure to just fit in, to match what everyone else is doing, often without a single word ever being said.
The key word there is implicit, right? No one's telling you what to do, you just feel it. It's this pull from the group, and it's all driven by this really deep, very human need to belong. But just how powerful is that need? Well, a classic experiment put that to the ultimate test.
So, picture this. It's the 1950s, and a psychologist named Solomon Asch sets up a super simple vision test. He shows people a car just like this one and asks the simple question, which line on the right, A, B, or C, matches the line on the left? I mean, the answer is obvious, right? It's clearly C. That's what the real participants thought too, at least at first.
But here's the twist. Everyone else in the room was an actor, and they were all told to give the same, obviously wrong answer. Now, imagine being the only real participant. One by one, everyone says the answer is A. What do? Well, it turns out a shocking number of people went against what their own eyes were telling them and just conformed with the group. So why? Why on earth would they do that?
Well, it pretty much boils down to two big reasons. The first is normative influence. That's our desire to be liked and to fit in. You don't want to be the odd one out, so you just go along with it. But the other reason is informational influence. This happens when you start to doubt yourself. You see the entire group disagreeing with you and you think, wait a minute, maybe they know something I don't. You look to them for the correct info.
Okay, so that's the unspoken pressure. But what happens when things aren't so subtle? What happens when someone comes right out and asks you for something? Well, that brings us to our next topic, compliance.
Compliance is what happens when someone, usually a friend, a coworker, or a salesperson, makes a direct request. Think of a friend asking you to help them move, or a charity worker asking for a donation. Unlike conformity, this is totally explicit. And you know what? There's a whole science behind the techniques that make us more likely to say yes.
The researcher Robert Cialdini famously laid out these psychological triggers. You've got reciprocity. Someone gives you a free sample and suddenly you feel this pull to buy something. There's social proof. That's when we see a bestseller sticker and just assume it must be good. Then there's authority, our tendency to trust experts. Commitment, our desire to stick with a decision we've made. And of course, liking. It's just easier to say yes to people we like. These are like the cheat codes for persuasion.
And now we're going to move into the most direct and, frankly, the most chilling form of social influence. This is what happens when a request is no longer a request. It's an order, and it's coming from someone in charge. This is obedience.
The huge difference here is the power dynamic. Obedience is all about responding to a demand from someone you see as a legitimate authority figure. A boss, a police officer, or, in one of the most famous experiments ever conducted, a scientist in a lab coat.
This absolutely haunting question is what drove the psychologist Stanley Milgram. In the aftermath of World War II, he wanted to understand something terrifying. He wanted to know if the horrors committed could be explained even partly by this deep-seated human tendency to just obey authority, even when it means violating your own moral code.
The setup he created was disturbing. A real person, the teacher, was sat in front of a machine with switches for electric shocks. In another room was the learner, who was secretly an actor. Every time the learner got a question wrong, the teacher had to give him a shock, with the voltage going up each time. As the shocks got stronger, the actor would scream, complain about a heart condition, and eventually just go silent. All the while, the experimenter in the lab coat would just calmly say, "Please continue."
So what happened? The results were beyond terrifying. 65%, 2 out of every 3 participants, regular, everyday people like you and me, kept flipping those switches all the way to the maximum, potentially lethal 450-volt level. They did it just because a guy in a lab coat told them to. They were clearly distressed, sweating, arguing, but in the end, most of them obeyed.
So, after seeing the incredible power of conformity, compliance, and especially obedience, we have to land on this crucial question. Where is the line? When does persuasion cross over and become unethical manipulation? Let's just quickly put it all together. With conformity, the pressure comes from the group and we're motivated by a need to fit in. With compliance, the pressure is a direct request from a peer and we're often motivated by things like reciprocity. And with obedience, the pressure is a command from an authority and we're motivated by a sense of duty or fear. Now, any of these can be used for good or for ill. And here it is. This is the critical distinction. Ethical persuasion is honest. It's transparent, it respects your freedom to choose, and tries to find a win-win situation. Manipulation, on the other hand, is deceptive. It hides its real motives. It deliberately exploits our psychological triggers for its own selfish gain. In the end, it all comes down to intent.
So I'll leave you with this final thought. Understanding these forces isn't just an interesting psychology lesson. It's a tool. It empowers you to make more conscious, deliberate choices in your own life. So the next time you feel that pull, to agree, to go along, to obey, just take a breath, pause for a second, and ask yourself, who is really making this decision?